Well, it was an ass whipping last night of epic proportions. I don't remember too many games where you just absolutely didn't look like you had a shot. Now, it was 14-7. They made a stop. I guess at that point you could say, if they would have got back in, but turnovers, ugly tackling, poor play, lack of effort, you name it. It was all a part of the game last night. So I'll start with you on this one in terms of the effort from the team last night. Was this a lack of effort? They just get absolutely outclassed by a better team.
I don't know if it was a lack of effort. I think it was a lack of talent. I think this team, especially defensively, when you look at the injuries and just overrating some of the talent, plus the aging factor, I think you're seeing some guys slip pretty rapidly, to be honest, from that standpoint, especially the safeties, Malcolm Jenkins and Rodney McLeod, who are proven players, but they're not playing up to their reputations, and they really haven't been for a number of weeks now. So I think all of that plays into the equation. You mentioned I thought they settled down after 14-0, the two early fumbles. Great throw from Carson Wentz, maybe his only great throw to Dallas Goedert for the touchdown. And then they forced the punt, and they run the football 3 times, which I don't have a problem with because Jordan Howard was running very well and running very physically, and they were having some success with it. And then they have 3rd and 4, and they give the football to Miles Sanders, and he hits the wrong hole. I don't get it. I don't understand how this team is using the talent they do have. And I think, to me, that is the bigger issue than anything else from a standpoint of this particular football game. I think long-term you got to be honest and say this organization overvalued a lot of pieces on the table.
Yeah, you mentioned some guys older and looking it. Who are some of those guys that you think are beginning, that their play is beginning to slip and that it's affecting this team right now?
Well, defensively, I think you see it with Malcolm and Rodney. I think offensive line, I think Lane Johnson, that's one of the worst games he's had, I think, in years, to be honest. You've had some issues. Jason Peters more, I mean, we've talked about that a lot and the injuries, and it was very unlikely he was going to hold up the entire season. Well, we're there. You see with Deshaun Jackson at 32 years old, we said the same thing. He was going to be injured at some point this season. I've said that on the show numerous times, and I said you got to hope it's 2 or 3 games and he gets back. Well, it hasn't been 2 or 3 games. It's been essentially almost half a football season, and Doug admitted today he's not going to practice on Wednesday. So now you got to start talking about Buffalo and him missing yet another game. So I think all of that is you have to put into the cocktail of what's gone wrong in this season, and then you have some people off the field talking out of school, so to speak, and now that's what happens when you start losing and things start looking ugly. People start pointing fingers. It's kind of what happens in this league.
Hey, John, I'm a little surprised with Doug Pederson as far as I just, you go back to 2017, and when he needed to find an answer for struggling Nick Foles, he came up with, a wing counter from Nelson Aguilar against the Falcons and a flea flicker against the Vikings, and then, of course, the Philly special in the Super Bowl. And it seems to me the last 2 weeks he's just kind of lining up playing football and expecting the wrongs to be righted. I'm just a little surprised a little bit about the lack of what I'd say and listen, I know he tried the fake field goal, but from an offensive standpoint, just kind of lining up and trying to do what you do. Have you expected a little more from Doug from that vantage point?
Well, I think yesterday, to be honest, I think both weeks are a little bit different. Minnesota, they tried to fake field goal. That's certainly rare. They used Nelson on a bubble screen. They used him on a fake reverse and got him the football out in the flat, and they got him. That's what he is. I've been saying it for years. He's a manufactured touch guy.
Right.
Then in Dallas, they're trying to get him down the football field. He can't do it. He can't track the football. He can't do it consistently. And people will point to the 1 time or 2 times that he actually counted. when we criticize players, we're talking they're NFL players. Of course they can make plays, but they're not going to do it consistently. He can't do it consistently. What he's very good at, and by the way, you saw it with Dallas and Tavon Austin, he's a manufactured touch guy. That's what you do with those players. You don't use them as fish out of water. I think that's my biggest concern with this coaching staff. They don't have Deshaun Jackson, and they point to, well, he's the next fastest guy, so let's use him in that role. Can't do it. So that's the bigger issue I have with the Eagles coaching staff than anything else. And like I said, I pointed out in Minnesota, I criticized them for the fake field goal. So I thought that was dumb. So I'm not going to say they're not trying to do inventive things. I don't think that's the issue. Certainly late in that game when it was a blowout, yeah, then they reverted to just lining up and playing offense, but the game was over.
John, so just to circle back a little bit, did you say that you felt like the effort was there? Did you feel like the effort and the preparation was there last night for the Philadelphia Eagles?
Well, certainly not the preparation. Yeah, I didn't see any lack of effort. People talk about the linebackers are Nate Gehring and Camus Grugier-Hill. I think they were trying. They can't, that's not good.
I agree. I think everyone was trying. You put on the helmet, you put on the pads, you're out on the field. Effort. Yeah, but there wasn't a typical Philadelphia Eagle urgency that we're used to seeing with Doug Pederson coach teams. And then with everything surrounding the team, and then after the game, you have Lane Johnson, who said nothing to, Scott Grayson, and then he said everything to John Clark. And then you have Malcolm Jenkins, who's typically there for 2 hours after games, and he was the first one to leave last night. And Jason Kelsey's not saying anything. And Doug looks like he's half crying, half upset, at the podium. And he's saying that he's being accountable, but he's not, saying that they had a bad week of practice. It's just, there's a lot going on with this team. And it seems to me that it's bigger than, we got outplayed by Dallas. I'm not saying you're saying that, but I just think that there could be an avalanche of issues to come here as the season progresses.
Well, there's some issues. I'm not saying, Lane's contractually obligated to say something to John Clark. That's the difference there.
Touche.
But, even today, Malcolm Jenkins on his spot and radio spot in Philadelphia, he said he doesn't know what Lane's talking about. Now, so you see some of those disconnects, and, Malcolm isn't in on offensive meetings, Lane's not in on defensive meetings. So who knows? Both could be telling the truth. There could be an issue. But, yeah, it's been one of the strengths of the Doug Pederson regime has been keeping these guys on the same page. Certainly hasn't seemed like they were on the same page over the past couple weeks. So I'm not trying by any stretch of the imagination to say there's not issues. There's issues. There's significant issues. But as always, I think the bigger part of it is not that somebody's talking to Josina Anderson. The bigger part of it is these players aren't good enough right now. Part of that is due to injuries and key guys being out, but part of it is due to age and overvaluing, and in some cases undervaluing. For the life of me, I've been talking about it for weeks now. We saw it again. Matt Collins is under a stretch of amazing non-productivity, and they won't put JJ on the field. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, John McMullen with us, Football at 4, and that's interesting because, and I brought up, not that they would have won the game or lost the game about Dillard playing left tackle, but is there somewhere in there that, like, hey, Vaitai was the starting left tackle in the Super Bowl, and he basically gets passed right over for a rookie. Now, Dillard might be better than him. I'm not suggesting that Vaitai's better. I'm just asking, is there some feeling of like, hey, this guy was on the Super Bowl team, he was the starter, and he didn't even get an opportunity to win that spot. And you're talking about JJ, who has got a couple of reps, but it doesn't seem that he's been giving much of an opportunity to get out on the field if he's the better player. So it just seems that, I don't know, are guys just being handed opportunities and not earning them?
Well, no, and I think those two are a perfect example of the lack of consistency. Look, you take Andre Dillard in the first round, you got to put him out there. If Jason Peters is injured, he's got to be a left tackle. and that's part of it. You sort of learn on the job, and you need those live reps, and he's going to be the left tackle of the future. So I have no issue with that. We saw it at the beginning of the year, and we talked about it's pretty clear Jordan Howard is a better runner than Miles Sanders. I have no problem with the Eagles wanting to go with Sanders as a high-level pick and throwing him on the field because he's their long-term future. Why isn't that the case with J.J. Arcega-Whiteside? So to me, it doesn't make much sense. With certain guys, you're giving them the benefit of the doubt. With other guys, you're not. And maybe there's something going on in practice. But, look, Mac Hollins has been what Mac Hollins has been. There is zero productivity. At least when you talk about Miles Sanders, you can point to the receiving aspect of it. And as bad as he's been as a runner, as bad as he's been as a kickoff returner, you still have that to lean on. Andre Dillard, you can see the natural mirroring ability. He's just not strong enough. That happens with a lot of young offensive linemen in this league. He's got to get stronger. He's getting bull rushed by Everson Griffin in Minnesota. Yesterday it was Robert Quinn with the bull rush. But you can see the skill. I don't see the consistency in the coaching staff. If you're going to default to your high-level picks, default to your high-level picks. Don't pick some of them and not all of them, especially when the alternative, and that's the point, the alternative, I got news for you. Jordan Howard has produced. Mac Hollins has not produced.
Yeah, it's staggering how I think that you mentioned it, had the lack of catches, and then you go to Aguilar, who has 7 catches in the last 4 games. This was one of your most important pieces 2 years ago to winning a championship. So that's 2 of the 4 receivers or 3 that you're jotting out there trying to get anything from and getting nothing from. But let me ask you this, John. With Carson Wentz, I think all of us have said this year, even after a loss, that Carson, you wouldn't put him high on the list of things that was wrong, even in a loss. Last night, a little bit different. Last night, he was shaky, and I'm being very kind with that. Yeah. He was. What do you think's going on there? Why do you think that was?
Well, I think part of it is he had a bad game. Everybody has bad games in this league, even Tom Brady, even Aaron Rodgers, whatever name you want to throw out there. Everybody has lesser performances. The key is you don't have a lot of them, and you bounce back. So I think the way he plays in Buffalo is very important. He just looked very uneven. He just did not look like himself. Not picking up that blitz off the front side. I mean, he even mentioned after the game he's got his pocket presence has to be better. I think for now you just chalk it up to a bad game. If you start seeing it consistently, I pointed out he was give the Pro Football Focus people a shout out. He was the 2nd ranked quarterback in the NFL coming into that game, 2nd best graded. People criticized him for that, but they graded him as the worst quarterback in the NFL yesterday. So it's not like they're not seeing it. When he's played well, they said he's played well. When he's played poorly, they say he plays poorly, and he played poorly in Dallas.
Yeah, tough time for the law of averages to kick in there.
I agree. I think he definitely did not have one of his better games. Obviously, he was pretty bad, to be honest with you. But I want to ask you, John, if you think a lot of this outside noise has gotten to him.
Yeah, I've always thought he was a little bit too sensitive to that kind of stuff, and I still continue to think that way. And I told that story on Countdown to Kickoff. I think this is a good story, and it's Jason Peters. And we were.
Yeah, I heard it was right at the end of the show, so you were kind of rushed. So if you can retell that story, because it was a great point.
Yeah, a reporter asked Jason at training camp, and anybody who's ever been down to Eagles practice, as Jeff knows, certainly, Jason's got a big man presence in that locker room, in that organization. And somebody asked him, if he's still hanging around to win a Super Bowl ring. And he looked the reporter dead in the eye and said, I already got one. And he understands what he means to that organization. and what he meant to that team in that season, even though he was injured and not being able to be on the football field in Minneapolis. Carson Wentz doesn't feel that way, and I don't know why. Because the team was 11-2. He was going to be the MVP. They weren't going to get a number one seed. And if they didn't get a number one seed, they probably weren't going to win the Super Bowl. He had a huge impact on that Super Bowl championship. And at some point, he's got to let the backpack go. They talk about rocks in the backpack and say, I already got one. That's how he's got to go about this. And he hasn't gotten to that point. And I don't know how you get there. I think that's more for a sports psychologist than anything else.
Yeah. Well, it just seems that he is kind of, I don't know, like an outcast almost. Like, last night he's running around, and it was almost like everybody else was like, hey, we weren't supposed to try that hard tonight, and he's still running around like, hey, guys, I'm trying. How come nobody else? Like, he just seems like he's not one of everybody else. And I don't normally feel that way, but last night I felt like he just doesn't seem to fit with this group for whatever reason. Like, and the whole Dak versus Wentz. And I like Dak, so whatever. But Wentz is more talented than Dak, but Dak is a leader, and I just feel like Wentz has a disconnect somewhere. Do you feel that? Do you watch that?
Well, I think it's fair, and I put that on Twitter. I think it's fair to question his leadership after that game. I don't think that's an unfair thing to do.
Like, do his teammates love playing with him?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Dak is a great leader or not, to be honest, because I'm not there every day. But I don't think Carson is a great leader. I would agree with you there. I think it would be interesting to see him play with a running back like Ezekiel Elliott. I mean, people talk about the Cowboys' success against the Eagles, Dak's success against Carson Wentz. It's Dak's success against Carson Wentz. The Eagles can't figure out what the heck to do with Ezekiel Elliott. That's the guy on the field that is dominating and setting the tone for these games. Now, from an Eagles perspective, though, is Doug Pederson and this coaching staff, would they even know how to use a running back like Ezekiel Elliott properly? I don't know. I have no idea.
Turn him into a situational back.
To see, like I always say, things are not in vacuums. The Eagles, Dak doesn't have the same situation as Carson and vice versa. If Dak had Miles Sanders running the football, guess what? It's probably not going to look like a leader all of a sudden. And by the way, he was coming off 3 straight losses. So I wouldn't go overboard with that kind of stuff other than to say, yes, I think it's fair to say that there are some people in that locker room, for whatever reason, do not like Carson Wentz. I think that's fair to say.
And, of course, John, when losing – that makes things fester, and we were talking about this before. We were trying to figure out, is this team more likely to just completely go into downward spiral or regroup at some point? And I do admit, like, I think we've all been here before with the 2006 team, with the 2008 team, different people, but still 2009 last year. And then Doug even mentioned Kansas City, 1-5, reeled off 10 straight wins. There is something about this team where I say, this is not the Bengals, this is not the Dolphins. They may be hurting, but they have talent when they step on the field that they should be in every game they play. I do kind of feel like a win over Buffalo. I guess I was says I can see this team being one of those late November, December, Andy Reid, late 2000 type teams that surprises us all a little bit.
Oh, I agree. The sky is not falling. People should look at the final 5 games on the Eagles' schedule.
Yeah.
So all they have to do is stay in this thing. Look, it's pretty clear there's only going to be one playoff team from the NFC East. So they're behind the 8 ball, no question, because they already lost one to Dallas, but they also get Dallas at Lincoln Financial Field. So that would be a must-win game at the time. But if you look at those final 5 games, if they can get through this stretch of Buffalo and 3 difficult home games, although Chicago's not looking nearly as difficult as it once did, say they even go 2-2, there's still the opportunity to make that late season run. And if guys get healthier, well, Jeff, what is this league about? It's about playing your best football at the end of the season, getting into the playoffs and being hot. It's much more difficult going on the road in the playoffs, no question. If they win the division, they get one home playoff game. So it's going to be a difficult hurdle, the playoffs. But sure, they can make a run.
John, your interpretation of what you saw in that Aguilar play, because a lot of people say he could have laid out, lack of effort. I saw you tweeting that's contrary to those beliefs.
Yeah, I mean, Mike, you and I have been talking about this for years. The guy can't track the football in the air. He can't do it. He's not good at it. He didn't pick up the football until far too late. And the same thing happened in Minnesota. And then at the end of the play, he looks incredibly awkward because he's picking it up late. He doesn't understand how quickly it's coming in, what angle. There's a science to it. And Deshaun Jackson's on the same team. If people remember when he played before, he's one of the greatest ever at tracking the football in the air. And that's what I talked about Nelson Aguilar. What does Nelson do well? Nelson needs the football in his hands near the line of scrimmage. He's a manufactured touch guy. He's Avon Austin. You saw Cordero Patterson return another kickoff for Chicago. That's the type of player he is. He is not a good downfield receiver. And anybody who's been, and look, Nelson and I have gotten into public fights in the locker room. I'm not a Nelson Aguilar apologist, but even I'm not going to question his effort. Nobody works harder on that team than Nelson Aguilar. He is not a downfield receiver, and that's what I was talking about earlier in this conversation. Why is the coaching staff putting him in situations he cannot succeed in? That is the bigger question to me.
For more, check out 973ESPN.com. Reaction from the game last night. And, of course, at JF McMullen for more as the Eagles lose to Dallas last night. It was a statement by the Cowboys, 37-10, and now the Eagles turn their attention to, by the way, a 5-1, very good defensive team in the Buffalo Bills. More tomorrow. Thanks, John.
Hey, thank you, guys.